Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, and I welcome you all to Emanate, the first webinar of this year and the ninth webinar of the Emanate series. For those of us joining us through Hangouts, I welcome you, and for those of us joining us from YouTube, I welcome you too. We are going to begin soon. So before we actually begin the webinar and the topic of today, that is going to be introduced by Cristina, I'm going to hand over this stage to Astu, who is the brain behind this idea of Emanate, and she is going to present a little about Emanate to us. Over to you, Astu.
Hello, everyone. Just hold on to this. I'm sorry. Okay, so I assume that everyone can hear me well. I mute myself, right? Okay. Okay, so sorry for the technical problem here. So yeah, I would like to introduce you about Emanate. So for those who have been with us for some times, it's nothing really new. But for those who are joining us for the first time, yeah, I would like to welcome you, and I'm really happy to have you joining us for the first time here, and hope to see you again in the next sessions and in the next activities of Emanate. So yeah, we created Emanate. It's in last year in 2018. It's started by the 2017 graduates, but now everybody is involved. Well, not everybody, but like more graduates are involved, and it has been 1 year, almost 1 year since the creation. So hopefully in the coming years, gonna even reach out to more people. So the concept is a platform for exchange of our experience through webinars, and also it involves that we already now have the Facebook and LinkedIn groups where mainly we share our ideas, what our findings are, like updates out there to regarding what is going on with regards to environment and engineering, energy, and we have future projects. So we have created newsletters, and we want to continue as well with the podcast, and hopefully soon that we will have a website where everybody can visit and have a look of what we are doing. So yeah, so that's basically what Emanate is doing, is PM3E, ME3 for everyone. So if you are PM3 or ME3, I actually would like you to join our community, to collaborate with us, to contribute in our activities, because until now we're still looking. I mean, we continuously will be looking for webinar speakers. We will continuously looking for someone who are willing to write articles for Emanate, and because we're looking into doing podcast, we have not really concluded what the concept are going to be, but yes, soon we will also be looking for the speakers for our podcast. And for those who have experiences with building websites, building newsletters, and have informations they want to include in those newsletters and on the website, you're really, really welcome. We have this LinkedIn group, Facebook group, and also you can subscribe to the YouTube to see what are the previous webinars are. And yeah, just feel free to join us. There is no recruitment needed. There is no selection needed, and we need you to be working with us and to enjoy what we are providing as well. So yeah, I'm handing it over back to Nipun for the presentation, and have fun, guys.
Okay, thank you, Astu, and let us begin. I welcome everyone on YouTube and everyone on Hangout who has just joined us in the last 5 minutes. Astu was just presenting about Emanate, and the future that we see with Emanate. And before I begin, I will just tell you how is this going to work. Cristina is going to present us a webinar on the topic of forecasting rural energy demand in the developing world. Is it that simple? During the webinar, every one of you is free to ask questions. For those of you who are in Hangout, do not hesitate to unmute your mic and ask questions, because this is supposed to be a lively session. For those of you who are watching us on YouTube, do not hesitate to write the questions in the YouTube chat. I will be forwarding your questions to Cristina, which will be answered on the spot. Also for those of you who are joining us on YouTube, we will really like it if you would tell us who you are and where you are from, where are you joining us from in the chat of YouTube. So feel free to use the chat as a lively discussion forum. And now to begin with, I, on behalf of Emanate, welcome Cristina for the webinar today on the topic of forecasting rural energy demand in the developing world. Is it that simple? As a doctoral researcher at ETH Zurich and EMPA, the Swiss Federal Laboratories for Material Science and Technology, Cristina's current work is focused on modeling the current and future energy demand of rural areas in developing countries to improve their electrification planning. Today, she is with us here to share how her research can contribute to reaching this seventh Sustainable Development Goal, which for 2030, and its implications, giving examples of how some countries are acting for the cause in terms of policies and investments of resources. She finds this topic important because it will give an insight about the current situation of energy access globally, having a look at the benefits it brings not only to the socio-economic condition of a country, but also to the world as a whole. And why is it important that we all get involved in this issue? Thank you, Cristina, for joining us, and I hand over the stage to you.
Okay, thank you, Nipun, and Astu also for the very nice introduction. So now I will share my screen and I will start the presentation. So I hope everything is fine and you can see here. So yeah, as Nipun and Astu were saying, well, I'm a doctoral researcher currently at ETH Zurich and EMPA, which is a federal research institute under the ETH domain as well here in Switzerland. And it is my pleasure to present this research topic, which is about forecasting rural energy demand in the developing world. So actually, I will show you that it's not as simple as it sounds. So first, I will start by giving you some general context. So basically, I will explain you what's the problem that I'm trying to solve. Then I will tell you about the purpose of my research, and I will let you know as well some of the general approaches that I'm currently applying in order to tackle these issues. So then I will show you an example of the application of my research through a case study that I recently presented in South Africa some months ago. So I think it's going to be very interesting for you. And then I will conclude my presentation and hopefully we can have a very interesting discussion. So this is just to give you a general overview about the energy access situation around the world. So here you can see the rural electrification rates, and you can see that the three developing regions, Latin America, Sub-Saharan Africa, and South Asia, are the most affected. So 95% of these non-electrified people are actually located in Sub-Saharan Africa.
No, I have to interrupt you, but I think we can only see the cover of your presentation, not the slides. If you can just restart it again, please.
Yeah, you can see it now?
Now we can see it. Thank you so much.
Okay, so I think it's when I put the slideshow. So I don't know if...
Cristina, can you be in presentation mode? Because I can see your PowerPoint as you can see it, not the full screen presentation.
That's what I'm doing, actually. Now I have it in the presentation mode, so that's quite weird.
Well, actually, if you go to the screen share options on Hangout, they let you choose which screen you want to share. So you have to choose the screen of presentation.
Wait. Are you able to see anything?
No.
Okay.
Well, now I see the slides, but in the normal mode, not in the presentation.
Now? Because it's currently under the presentation mode.
On the not presentation, on the desktop. You should start the desktop. Maybe you can try sharing the desktop instead of just the.
Okay, good.
Hi guys, I'm just wondering, is it the same problem going to be for the Mac or Windows laptop?
No, I think it's the problem of Hangouts, because Hangouts differentiates between different kind of windows. It doesn't share all windows the same way, so you have to choose particularly which window you want to share.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
What about now?
It's good.
It's good. Thank you so much.
Is it okay?
Yes.
Okay, good. So yeah, I was explaining you the content of my presentation. So I don't know if you managed to see this. No.
We can see it now.
We see the map.
Okay, good. Okay, good. So yeah, I was explaining you that I would like to give you a general overview about the energy access situation around the world. So as you can see here in this map, this is the rural electrification rate, and these critical cases are located in Latin America, Sub-Saharan Africa, and South Asia. So 95% of these people non-electrified are located actually in Sub-Saharan Africa, as you can see here. And here I'm showing you the population with access to clean cooking. So actually you can also see that the 3 developing regions that I talked to you about before are still in the critical case, but here Central America, Sub-Saharan Africa, and South Asia get a little bit worse. So 87% of these numbers that I just presented are located in rural areas. So what are rural areas in the first place? Well, these are characterized by having low population densities, being isolated, and having low income and per capita energy consumption. So let's say you are an investor. If you read these characteristics, are you willing to invest in these areas? Because I don't think so. So now I'll show you the facts, which are actually not fun at all. So in Africa, electricity is inaccessible, unaffordable, and unreliable for most people. And the average rural electrification rate goes around 25%, having the lowest in Central African Republic with 0.4%, and in Burkina Faso with 0.8%. So actually what helps this number to go up are the Northern African countries such as Egypt, Tunisia, Algeria, and also South Africa is contributing a lot to this number. So the main driver for electrification are political ambitions. So I come from a developing country, and I'm pretty sure that most of you come from a developing country too. So we all know that corruption plays a big role in delaying the development of a country, right? So basically, what could the government win if they get these people electrified? I honestly think that it's more convenient for a corrupted government to have most of the population uninformed and disconnected. So this is a very difficult challenge for this. And now for the barriers of electrification, we have low rural markets, high investment cost, and high donor dependency. So in other words, it's very hard to find a balance between affordable energy prices and prices that are attractive enough for the investors. So 2.7 billion people worldwide still do not have access to clean cooking. And this is directly linked to 2.6 million premature deaths per year due to household air pollution. So why is energy access so important? Well, among many other benefits, it extends to study hours for children. It reduces the domestic burden for women because, yeah, in most of the cases, children and women are the ones who are collecting all the wood that is going to be used later on to meet their energy requirements.
Cristina, I just have a quick question before you continue.
Yes, ask to.
What is defined as clean cooking?
Access to clean cooking is, for example, not using biomass for cooking because it contributes a lot to household air pollution. and also it has a bad impact to the environment. So that's definitely not a clean fuel to use for cooking. So it's basically, I will explain you about this later on if you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So yeah, as I was saying, some of the benefits as well is that it increases the economic productivity of the rural villages, increases the access to information, and decreases the exposure to household air pollution. So what we actually are doing about it, I'm pretty sure that you all know what the Sustainable Development Goals are. So these are meant to improve people's quality of life while reaching a more sustainable future. So these were proposed by the United Nations in the year 2015. And here I would like you to focus on the goal number 7. So it's to ensure access to affordable, reliable, sustainable, and modern electricity for all. So what are actually developing countries doing in order to reach this goal? So here I'm going to show you some of the actions that some governments are currently applying. And here I want it to be a little bit dynamic. So I will give you an introduction of the program, of the electrification program. And then I will ask you if you think that it succeeded or not. Dynamic. So I will give you an. Yeah. Okay, so I'll start with Togo. So more than 10,000 solar-powered streetlights were installed in the 5 regions of Togo. So these streetlights also included outlets for charging of appliances, and this also served as Wi-Fi spots. So do you think it succeeded or not? Actually, it did succeed. So it increased the security of all of these rural villages. It helped also children to do their homework during the night hours, for example, and it increased the productivity of these rural villages. So now I will talk about Bangladesh Solar Home Systems Program. So over the last 2 decades, Bangladesh has installed more than 4 million solar home systems, enabling to be the country with the largest number of solar panels installed per capita. So do you think this was a good decision from the government of Bangladesh or not? It actually wasn't. And it was because all of these solar home systems were of very, very, very poor quality. So the efficiency was ranging from 10 to 12%, and the generation capacity was from around 20 to 50 watts. So it's basically nothing. It's just to light up a couple of light bulbs and that's it. And yeah, as you can see here, the high prices charged for inferior systems have emptied the pockets of the consumers. So this was because they had a very bad estimation of the energy demand, and then they designed these solar home systems based on this, and they found also these solar home systems with a very poor quality because they were very cheap. So they were worrying about their pockets and not about the consequences that these bad decisions will make. So now let's talk about South Africa's Integrated National Electrification Program. So this program consisted in the extension of the national grid to rural households. So it started in the early 90s. So it was when they changed the government to Nelson Mandela. So now not only the white people could have access to electricity, but also all the other population. So actually it was a great success because before of this, the electrification rate in South Africa was of 35%, and then it increased at 84%. So it was quite a great success. But they found out that it was not benefited the most isolated rural dwellers. So what they do about it is that they implemented also the Solar Home Systems Program to this initial program. So what happened here is that they reached from 84% of electrification to 85.5%, but actually it's facing a lot of technical and economic challenges. And being one of them, the inability of the solar home systems on meeting the demand of the rural dwellers. So as you can see here, the governments can deploy many electrification solutions, but the starting point of any of them is to have an accurate knowledge of the energy demand.
Cristina, I'm going to pitch in here with a question. We talk about. I'm going to talk about this from an investor's point of view. So you talk about putting projects. You talk about 4 projects about their success, failure, and probable success. But what about their impact in the long term? And for example, there are some programs. For example, you talk about Togo's solar street lights program, and this is really an interesting fact that you install street lights with Wi-Fi and with solar panels. But from if I'm an investor, I would already also be interested in knowing, first of all, how feasible is the program from an investor's point of view? Is it really, what are the positive returns, not only financial but also social? But also the biggest fact, are those solar panels still there? Because, and this is important, in today already in Europe we have a problem of solar panels being stolen from solar parks and solar and roofs and homes and etc. I imagine this problem is worse in the developing world. So when these
Yeah,
programs,
I understand your question.
yes. So I mean, do you have a solution, or do you have any data on how that impacts the application of these programs?
Yeah, actually, what the governments are currently doing, because the expansion of the grid will be the best solution. I mean, that's like the highest electrification solution. But the infrastructure to get to these very isolated villages is very costly. So no one is willing to invest on building this infrastructure. So what they are trying to do is to provide off-grid solutions. So for example, here they are not providing just like solar home systems such as in Bangladesh and South Africa, which can power just like a couple of light bulbs in the household. But here they are introducing this new methodology in order to light up the streets of these rural villages. And they are giving also the chance for the people to charge the electrical appliances there and use it also as a Wi-Fi spot. Because one interesting thing that I found here is that even if the rural people don't have like a lot of income monthly, they do have a lot of mobile phones. So it's like a priority for them to own these appliances. So it very has an impact on them and their productivity hours as well, as these are extended. And regarding the issue of the solar panels, if they are still there, well, actually, yeah, this is a problem that we have in the developing world. And when I was in South Africa, I was very impressed because there were a lot of people selling solar panels on the streets. So it was like I was passing on the highway and there were a lot of rural people selling their solar panels there. But that's because they are not able to use them. It's just useless for them because it's quite costly to have them there and it's not meeting their energy needs. So it's just basically for nothing. And that's why they are doing this kind of actions. And this special case of Togo, it was a UN's funded project. So actually it was a donation. It was not a private investor. So I don't know if that answered your question.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, good. So yeah, as I was telling you, the starting point of any of these electrification solutions is to accurately know the energy demand or have an estimation of the energy demand of these people in order to design the supply technology. So that's the purpose of my research, which is basically create a model with which you can estimate the current and future energy demand of rural households in developing countries. So I can help the national authorities and also private and public companies in order to keep developing more these projects and to get to reach this SDG number 7. So you may think, yeah, currently there are plenty of softwares which are trying to do the same, but there is also some gap. There is a knowledge gap which we should keep in mind. So for example, these softwares require specific site data as an input. So for example, all the companies that are currently developing these projects actually have to travel there in order to get the data that they need and to model this estimation of the energy demand in these softwares. But going there and getting this data is quite costly as well, and it's not convenient for the companies. I mean, it could be easier if you could have already these estimations and this data is stored somewhere, right? So these softwares also have inadequate calibration and validation methods, and these are based on assumptions due to the lack of information from these rural people. And these are macroeconomic assumptions. I mean, this doesn't represent the rural areas. And also these softwares are static in time models. So these are not projecting the demand of the future. So I'm trying to fill in these gaps by developing a core model based on different case studies that I'm currently developing in Latin America, Sub-Saharan Africa, and South Asia. So for the moment, I'm focusing on Sub-Saharan Africa because as I was telling you, that's the most critical case that we have. And currently, I'm working on the cases of South Africa, Tanzania, Ethiopia, and Nigeria. So then this model will be general enough so it can be projected at a broad geographic scope. And by this, I mean that this model will be used also in other countries other than the ones that I'm performing currently my case studies. So this is the general approach. So I'm creating some appliances ownership models, which are calculating the number of appliances per household. I'm calculating the lighting consumption as well, and this is based on the geographic location and the hours of sun. I'm calculating human behavior models as well, based on usage pattern of the appliances and the lighting. I'm also taking into account the power rates of these appliances and the light bulbs. And then I will model the electricity demand per household per day, and then the hourly load profiles, which are needed to design the supply technologies that are going to meet these demands.
Before you go ahead, I'm sorry, there's a
Yeah.
question from Johanna that I'm going to pose to you.
Okay.
She asked that, so we can conclude that given the culture of developing countries and their population, centralized generation would be a better solution than distributed generation. Is that true?
Yeah, actually, I will give you some insights at the end of the presentation about this. So, yeah, I mean, it's very hard for a developing country to invest in improve the and to get the infrastructure, the necessary infrastructure to these very isolated people, right? So actually, they are not willing to pay this big amount of money to get like a couple of people electrified, which won't consume a lot of electricity because they don't have enough appliances, and they just live with lighting and a couple of small appliances which are not like a good, let's say these are not attractive for the national utility companies, right? So that's why the government needs to focus on this, on getting these isolated rural villages electrified by off-grid solutions. So yeah, that's actually one of my conclusions, and I will come up with this later, if that's okay.
Okay, thank you so much.
Okay, so now explain you about the case study that I made in South Africa. So for this, I developed some appliances ownership models and some time of use and schedule models. So basically, this second part is the human behavior modeling. So for this, here you can see the number of samples that I was taking, and the main sources were the general household surveys and the time of use surveys. And this information was provided by the Statistics of South Africa Department. So in this graph, you can see the distribution of samples by province. So the good thing for you is that this is the only equation that I'm including in today's presentation, because I didn't want to annoy you with a lot of mathematical algorithms that I'm analyzing right now and a lot of equations which are necessary, but I won't have the time to explain you right now. So this is the simplest way to explain it to you. And that's how I calculate the electricity demand. So for this, I need the saturation rate, which is the appliances ownership, the number of appliances per household. Then the time of use, which is related to the human behavior, and then the power rates of each of the appliances. So for these two, for the saturation rates, I'm using different machine learning regression and classification algorithms. And for the human behavior modeling, I'm using also a quite diverse selection of algorithms ranging from Asian-based models to Markov chain and Monte Carlo simulations. So what I want you to remember is that I calculated the electricity demand based on 3 scenarios. So this is regarding the appliances ownership of the household. So for example, the basic scenario is including the lighting, mobiles phone charging, and the use of radios. The basic plus TV is including the previous one plus the ownership of a TV. And the total ownership scenario is the previous one plus the ownership of refrigerators, microwaves, electric stoves, computers, etc. So I would like you to remember these 3 scenarios because I will mention them afterwards. So here I wanted to show you some of the variables that I'm using in my analysis. So this was for the appliances ownership models. So for example, I found that the mobile phone ownership depends on the number of people living in the household, in the sex of the household head, the age of the household head, the employment status of this person, and the dwelling type. While, for example, for a more power-consuming appliances, such as the electric stove, it depends more on the health status of the household head. So I think this is quite related to household air pollution. I mean, if the household head has health issues, then he is not owning an electric stove. And it's also a very expensive appliance, so it depends on the income of the household, the number of rooms, the dwelling type, and the grid connection. So this is to show you some of the results of my models. So this is to measure the prediction accuracy. So for example, for the mobile phones, I obtained a prediction error from 4.4 to 4.8%, while for the fridges, I obtained a prediction error from 3 to 4%, which is actually not that bad. So now let's move on to the human behavior modeling. This is the most interesting part for me, actually. And here I calculated based on a probabilistic analysis the typical schedule of rural household in South Africa. So here each color represents one activity. So for example, at 4 a.m. there are more probabilities that the household members are sleeping. At let's say 1 p.m. there are more probabilities that the household members are eating or drinking. And at 8 p.m. there are more probabilities that the household members are watching TV or performing entertainment activities. So based on this typical schedule, I managed to calculate the time of use of each of the appliances because I linked all of these activities to the appliances that I was analyzing in the appliances ownership models. So here I divided it in 2 types, in the main activity related and the secondary activity related. So for example, let's say that we are cooking. So if we have a stove and a microwave, I will be using the stove and the microwave. But let's say that I like to cook while dancing salsa. So indirectly, I will be using also the radio or the TV. So that's what I mean with the secondary use and the main use.
I have a question for you from Marco, if you do not mind. The question is that could you mention some of the data collection sources and or the methods used to so that we can understand more of the building process? Is the process survey based, or if not, then how is it actually carried out?
Yeah, actually, I found all of this information on this Statistics of South Africa department that I told you at the beginning of the presentation. So basically, these are household surveys. So let's say these are surveys that the government is giving to the households, to rural households, and these are containing table in which they have a set of predetermined activities. And these activities are divided in a range of like time steps. So for example, in South Africa, it was every 30 minutes. So actually the members of the household had to fill in this this very complicated form. So they have to put, for example, at 4 a.m. I'm probably eating. So they were just putting an X in the square that it was needed to fill in. So it's kind of, they were kind of trying to register their activity for 24 hours. And then I made, with all of this information, at every 30 minutes, I modeled this based on a probabilistic analysis, this typical schedule for all the rural households in South Africa. So I don't know if that answers your question. And if you have questions about the methodologies that I'm using, the algorithms and the equations and all of this, you can contact me directly after the presentation.
Yeah, thank you. That answered very well the question.
Okay, good. So let's keep on going to the results. So do you remember that I told you that you should remember the three scenarios that I was analyzing, the basic plus TV, and the total scenario? So here I'm showing you the results of the basic and the total. So the basic was relying more on the lighting consumption, and the total was relying more on high power consuming appliances. So here I found that for the basic scenario, the national average electricity demand of a rural household in South Africa could be of 0.6 kilowatt hour per household per day, while for the total scenario, the national average could be 3.22 kilowatt hour per household per day. So for example, the province of Gauteng, which is the richest one, has the highest electricity consumption in both scenarios, and that's because it has the highest ownership of appliances. For the case of the province of Free State, which has the lowest basic electricity demand, that's because it has the lowest lighting consumption. So actually here is very interesting because I'm linking also the lighting consumption to the number of rooms of the household, in the household. So actually the number of rooms is directly related to number of people living in the household. And here in this province, in Free State, they have the lowest number of people per household. So that's why they have the lowest lighting consumption. And for the case of Limpopo, they have the lowest appliances ownership, and that's reflected by having the lowest total electricity consumption. So here I'm showing you a map in which I'm presenting the basic and the total scenarios of the electricity demand, along with the population distribution. So in the pink, you can find the rural areas, and in the light blue, the urban areas. So what we can see here is that the highest basic electricity demand lies where higher concentrations of rural population are located. So as you can see here, the basic electricity demand is this one, the highest, and it has also the lowest total electricity demand, because what this is telling you is that rural people are actually more using electricity for lighting and the use of small appliances more than for the consumption of high power consuming appliances, because basically they don't have the money to get these appliances.
I have another question for you, Cristina. This one is coming from Johanna. She's asking that how frequently were these surveys made? Was it yearly or more frequently, or what was the periodicity of the surveys? And when was the survey that you used was actually carried out? Do you have a reference year, or is it an average of multiple years?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So the frequency of these surveys, it depends on the country, because it's the country which is investing actually in developing this kind of surveys. So this time of use surveys, these are less frequent in developing countries. So for example, I just could find it in South Africa, in Tanzania, in some countries in Latin America, but I mean, not all of the countries are developing these very detailed surveys. So yeah, I mean, I'm using the most recent ones. So for the case of South Africa, that was for the year 2016. And Actually, to develop my models in the future, I'm using a time series analysis. So I'm taking into account more than 10 years of use of these surveys, so not just the recent one. So for this case study that I'm presenting you today, I used the most recent one for the case of South Africa. But for my whole analysis, I'm using more time series.
Okay, I want to build up on the question that Johanna asked. I want to ask, how complete are these surveys? I mean, are they really detailed enough for you to be able to model without assumptions? And if not, what are the kind of assumptions that you have to take while making the model? And how do you plug the gaps in the information of the surveys?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question as well. Because as you know, in developing countries, I mean, there is so little information collected for rural areas. You cannot even find it for urban areas sometimes. So it's quite difficult to get this very detailed data from the rural areas. So yeah, actually, I have a lot of issues with this data collection because I'm currently talking to the governments, to private and public companies in order to get this information. And you have no idea of the amount of confidentiality agreements that I have signed already. But yeah, it's data that is very difficult to find, and there is always lacking information. So for example, I won't find the same data in South Africa, even if it's the same survey because it was implemented by the World Bank. I won't find the same amount of information for South Africa than for, let's say, Ethiopia. So it's very difficult to select at the end all the variables and all the components, all the characteristics that you are going to take from these surveys, because this has to be standardized for all the other surveys that you are using for all the other countries. So that's the difficult part, right? And sometimes these surveys can have one variable which is the same, is repeated in every single country, but maybe in South Africa they are measuring this variable by meters, and in Nigeria they are measuring by kilometers, or yeah. So it's a very, very complicated task, I would say. And I'm also modeling in between methodologies in order to get more data to fill in these data gaps. So that's very case specific. So it depends on which kind of data I'm trying to fill in with this gap. And I'm developing also mini methodologies in order to fill in these gaps. But yeah, that's the most difficult part, I will say, by working on this topic.
Thank you.
Okay, so here there's an estimation of the load profiles that I'm modeling. So here I have it by regions, and here in the bars you can see the average. So I obtained that the average peak was of 0.37 kilowatts, and it happens at 6 p.m. So at 6 p.m. actually is where you have more probability that all of the household members are in the household performing activities. So that's why you have the peak here. So my whole point by making this analysis on this case study in South Africa was to prove why this solar home systems program was actually not working, and if it was because of technical reasons. So if it was because of bad calculation of the energy demand, of a bad design of the solar home systems. So that's why I implemented these case studies in 2 villages. One, which is this one, which I try to pronounce the name in South Africa and people laugh at me, so I'm not trying anymore. But yeah, it's in the region of Limpopo. And the other one is near Durban. So it's in this region, which I'm not planning to pronounce as well. So here I calculated the 3 scenarios of the electricity demand, the basic plus TV, and the total. And I wanted to see if the standard solar home systems that they are implemented right now are able to meet these demands. So here I'm showing you the weather files for these rural villages. So what I found here was that the standard solar home system, well, these are the characteristics of the standard home solar systems that they are installing in the electrification program in South Africa. And then with the electricity demand and the weather files, I managed to get how much electricity is delivered to the load and what's the solar fraction of these solar home systems. So as you can see here, actually these solar home systems are not able to meet the total, not even the basic requirements of electricity demand in both of these cases. And these are only able to meet up to 52.5% of these demands. So that's actually a very interesting case, and that's why this program is not working. So here you can see in the map the solar potential in South Africa, also mapped with the national grid, with the population distribution and the basic electricity demand. So here, when I have these green dots, are the 2 rural villages. So here you can see that they have a quite high quite large basic electricity demand and quite less potential, solar potential. So maybe the solar systems that they have designed could work maybe on this province, which has a smaller electricity demand and higher potential, and in this one as well. So now let's talk about my model and what are my future challenges with it. So actually my biggest challenge now is estimating the future demands, because I have to take into account all the post-electrification induced effects. So for example, now that I got electrified, I will tend to use more my light bulbs. I will tend to consume more lighting. I will tend to, if I have a radio, I will just leave it on for the whole day and I don't care about it. So I somehow need to measure these induced effects of the post-electrification issues. Then I also need to take into account the patterns of acquisition of appliances, because once people get electrified, I have found in different studies that, for example, the first appliance that they get is a TV, followed by a freezer or a refrigerator in order to keep their food good. So I really need to analyze what's the acquisition patterns of the appliances and what are the drivers of these patterns. So it depends on the region for sure, because as I was telling you, I'm analyzing the cases of Latin America, South Asia, and Sub-Saharan Africa. And I'm completely sure that these are not the same patterns everywhere. And then I need to find also the fuels transition patterns. So we have the energy ladder and the energy stacking. So the energy ladder is basically moving on to a cleaner fuel, as you can see here in this image. So for example, from straw to wood to charcoal to kerosene and so on. And the energy stacking is, for example, now that I have electricity, I won't cook with electricity. I will keep using biomass for cooking because the taste of my food is different if I cook it with an electric stove than if I cook it with biomass, for example. And I know a lot of cases of people who are actually doing this, and not necessarily in rural areas. So I really find this pattern quite a lot in developing countries. And also the future trends, I need them to take into account as well, because the population is growing rapidly, and also in developing countries, the economy is quite dynamic and it's growing as well. So I really need to model certain scenarios in order to calculate the future trends of the electricity consumption. So now let's go to the conclusions. So electrification should be a global priority for policymakers, as it contributes significantly to the development of a country. And for governments to improve their electrification programs, they need to use better tools to calculate the energy demand, and also to design their supply technologies in order to cope with this demand. So then we can improve the planning of electrification projects. Also, more solutions other than solar home systems should be applied, because, for example, a solar home system will be useful only to light a couple of light bulbs and just for the use of small appliances like charging your mobile phone and so on. but not for performing productive activities. So actually that was the case in Bangladesh, because these solar home systems were not actually improving the socio-economic conditions of these people, because they couldn't use it to perform productive activities. So that's why I strongly recommend to perform mini-grids instead of solar home systems. And then we need the governments also to subsidize the acquisition of energy-efficient appliances for these rural areas. Because, for example, a rural household, it's not going to look for the most energy-efficient fridge, right? Once they get electrified, they just want a cheap one. They are just looking for the cheapest. So actually, if they got incentives from the government in order to choose more energy efficient appliances, this will help us to cope with the electricity demand that is going to increase by giving these people access to electricity. And then, well, greenhouse gas emissions gained by people that get electrified are more than offset by reducing the use of traditional biomass in cooking. So it means that the governments should also subsidize these people for getting access to cleaner fuels for cooking. So for example, in one case that I'm analyzing in Tanzania, this is a private company, so they are developing different mini-grids projects, and these are powered by solar panels. So when they develop a mini-grid project, they are also having LPG stations for the people who are living there. So for example, this is to incentivize them to acquire LPG instead of biomass, for example, for cooking. So these electrification plants are actually helping them to move from the biomass, which is going to be of great benefits in the world. So I would like to finish with this. The least expensive way to achieve universal electricity access is with renewables, thanks to the declining cost of small-scale solar PVs for off-grid and mini-grid electricity, and the increasing use of renewables for grid-connected electricity as well. So I would like to end with this, and thank you so much for your attention, and please, if you have questions, feel free to ask.
Thank you very much, Cristina. I will invite everyone who is on Hangouts to ask questions if they have some, and people joining us from YouTube, please use the chat window, the live chat window, to ask your questions. In the meantime, I'm going to ask a couple of questions to you while we wait for other people. First of all, I want to ask, how was the enthusiasm of the governments to participate in this study? If you have had any contacts with the governments for the data, for example, are they looking at this positively, or again, they're looking at this something that might be done but might not have any results for them in the end?
Yeah, that's very interesting to ask. Actually, the good thing about my project is that it's going to be free of use at the end of it. So I will create all of these models, and then all the private, public companies and all the national authorities as well are going to be able to use it for free. So actually, I think that that's why also private companies are willing to collaborate with me in my research, because it's, in the long term, is going to help them a lot to improve their electrification, these projects planning.
Okay, I'm going to take a question from YouTube. The question is, what are your thoughts on the comparative cost of grid extension versus standalone systems? When they talk about standalone systems, this also means mini grid or micro grid or solar standalone systems for developing countries.
Yeah, actually the cost, well, it depends on how isolated are these rural areas, right? So actually I was reading some study, it was performed in India, I remember, and they were analyzing how costly it was for the grid extension compared to the installation of a mini grid to get a rural village electrified. And actually the cost for the grid extension went up to 55% more than the cost of developing a mini grid. So it was definitely better to give them electricity through a mini grid than just extending the national grid to them.
Thank you. Another question coming from Hangouts is, do you have any insight on how to solve the problem of vandalism or for the people who are selling their photovoltaic panels, for example?
Yeah, actually, that depends a lot on the companies which are developing this kind of projects. But what I have contact with one of these companies, and what they are doing is actually to try to incorporate these people, the rural households, in the process of making the solar panels. So, for example, they are taking these materials and everything to them, so they can build their solar panels, and they can have this certain affection to it, and it's not like anything else. Like they are not just leave it like that. They are just going to protect them because it's part of them, or they have kind of collaborated to build them or something like this. So there are quite a lot of strategies in order to tackle this issue. And also I know about this little village in Tanzania. They have a mini grid, and the company has has put security on these mini grids also, and it's included in the price of the electricity. So yeah, there are many ways that these companies and these programs are implemented. So it depends on the country and how much are they willing to spend as well.
I think personally that's a really good idea. For example, if you give stake in the project to the local population, they feel that the project belongs to them, not to
Yeah,
a,
exactly. Yeah,
not to a
that's what I try.
company.
Yeah,
Exactly.
that's
And when they
what I
feel that
was
the
trying to.
project belongs to them, probably the chances of vandalism are much lower than they would
Yeah,
be for a project that has
yeah,
just been installed, for example, paid for by a fund or by a donation, and in the end, after 5 years, you see no results.
exactly.
Okay. Yes.
I think that's the best way, because in that way you can get also the people to be more educated about the topic, so they understand about the benefits of getting electrified through renewables.
Okay. We have another question. The question is, do you have any suggestions for example, the project of solar housing installations in Bangladesh that proved out to be a failure? Do you have any suggestions of how that project could have been could have had more positive outcomes over there? I think one of the suggestions would be to have the same thing for the people to have stake in the project, but I think you might have better insights on this.
Yeah, actually, I was reading a lot about this Bangladesh case, and it's quite funny because they count these people that have a solar home system in their house, even if they are not using it, as people who are electrified. So, for example, by giving like more than 4 million solar home systems to the people in Bangladesh, of course, the electrification rate, if you count it as this, as I just told you, is going to rise. But these people is not getting actually electrified at all, because the socioeconomic condition of these people is just didn't improve with this implementation of this program, and the government used the cheapest option to get them electrified, and they didn't calculate well the energy demand. They didn't design well these solar panels. So I think it's a mistake from the government, but by not having quite a good knowledge of the technology that they were planning to implement. So yeah, there are plenty of ways with which this problem could be tackled since the beginning, but now all of these people are suffering with the high prices of the electricity that they are paying. Some of them are paying for it still, and some of them are they just have decided to sell their solar panels and not use them at all. And yeah, that's very difficult to analyze. That's just regarding the government, like the decisions that the government take.
Yes, I think I agree with you, and also with the fact that you mentioned that these peoples are being considered as they have already been electrified. That means that
Yeah.
it raises a lot of questions when you read the statistics for these countries, because these statistics could have a really high error ratio, which is not really evident.
Yeah, exactly. And actually, in these surveys that I was using for this, for the creation of my models, I could find a question. For example, do you does your household have electricity connection? So by electricity connection, they meant grid connection, right? So they wrote no. And then, do you have any other source of electricity, like solar panels, or like which kind of fuels are you using? And a lot of these people put solar panels, but then there was a comment section, and a lot of these people were putting like, yes, I have a solar panel, but I'm not using it. So actually, in my analysis, all of these people with solar panels and not using it were just basically non-electrified.
Yes. But I have another question evolving from that, what you just said. Maybe we are going a bit away from the main topic, but I think it's interesting to ask this. How do you decide what is electrified and not? Because it has a huge impact on the statistics that we're using, which in turn has huge impact on policies, public and private investments. So, what is the basis of the decision of who is electrified and who is not?
Yeah, actually, for me, to be electrified is to meet your basic energy needs, right? So this depends on the statistics calculation of each of the countries, because as I was telling you, in Bangladesh, they just assume that if they have a solar panel in their house, they are electrified. So it just depends on the country and how deep are they going with their analysis. But I just think that they care more about how international people are going to look at them. So if they have a higher number of electrification, they are going to be one of the best, for example, in South Asia with Bangladesh, but that's basically not the case. So I think that they should implement also, like for example, they can implement different electrification options, but afterwards they should measure somehow how these electrification programs have improved the socioeconomic conditions of these people, and how these people can rely to this new energy source. So I think it's a very good question, and that should be tackled directly from the government side. How can they measure these post-electrification effects?
Okay, thank you very much. I have a last couple of questions before we end this. One of them is that, do you have any insights on how the companies, private or public, deal with the political will issues that you have mentioned earlier in the presentation?
Um, yeah, I mean, working for a private company to come to a developing country and try to develop this kind of projects is quite hard, I think. First of all, because of the cultural like, differences, and also because if these governments are corrupted, they are basically going to ask for something, right? So yeah, I mean, I personally don't know how they are actually handling these issues, because that's quite in the management side. So I don't know about it, but I do know how are they coupling with these technological issues.
Okay, thank you very much. And I think this will be the last question for the session, and it's a really interesting question coming from YouTube. The question is, could you give us an example of a project that attempted to study the same kind of modeling in rural areas, which you are going to do now, but which went wrong? And if you know any such project or any such study, what was the thing that went wrong?
Okay, actually, the first step of my PhD was to study a lot of people and projects which have worked on these issues as well. And yeah, I have plenty of examples, but right now I would like to mention one. So if you go to UNDESA, to the page of UNDESA, so here you can find one electrification I don't remember quite well what's the name, but that's to estimate the electricity demand of rural areas, and that's a geospatial model which you can use by enter to this page, because it belongs to the models that the UN has developed for the sustainable development issues. So, for example, what happens in these models? Well, they are just taking different scenarios of electricity demands. So they are not just calculating the calculation is not quite accurate, because they are not doing a bottom-up approach as I'm doing. For example, the calculation of the appliance's ownership or the human behavior modeling. They are just making some assumptions about it. Like, for example, if the household owns 3 TVs, then this household will have this electricity demand with this power rate. But that's just so easy to find, right? So it's just like quite rough calculations, and these are not accurate at all. And these are also based on macroeconomic factors, as I was telling you, which are national numbers, but these do not necessarily represent rural areas. So that's where I'm trying to fill in this gap. So I'm trying to model accurately the electricity demand specifically for rural areas and not for the whole country.
Okay, thank you. I think in the coming days, because it's a really good question to end this session, and I think in the coming days we are probably going to put up a post on our social networking pages and even on our newsletter to even elaborate more on this point.
Are we less
Yeah.
on time, or can I ask a question?
Please
Yes.
go ahead.
Firstly, Cristina, thank you for explaining it, because it was really easy to follow your presentation. So thank you for that. My question is more in regards to once your model is developed through your PhD, how would it be used, and who do you think is the right user of the model? For example, is it a company who wants to invest, or is it about governments who want to identify how much is the demand? Because I kind of have a feeling that even when you develop the model, it would still need a lot of information that needs to be put into the model when it's being used. And in such a case, who would finding this information? So who would be doing the groundwork, and how do you foresee the use of the model?
Yeah, thank you, Nikki, for your question. Actually, what I'm doing is I'm not just working on the model, but I'm also working on the validation and calibration of it. So I have some field work to do on this year. So for example, in August, I'm going to Nigeria, and in April or May, I just haven't confirmed yet, I'm going to Tanzania in order to take some on-field measurements and to test basically if this methodology is actually working for these villages. So I'm planning to do the same in South Asian countries and in Latin American countries. So it's not just about developing the methodology, it's also about calibrating it and validate it in order to be used and to be taken seriously, you know? And regarding the end user of these models, I think that it's going to be quite easy to implement, even for the private and public companies, and to develop the projects, and also for the government to develop new policies, for example, in the terms of energy demand and energy transition. So I think both of them can use it, and I will try to make some collaboration links with some international institutions as well in order to promote it, and to be performing more case studies, on-field case studies, so it can be more and more improved every time.
Thank you.
Sure.
Could I ask an additional question also following on that?
Yes, please go ahead.
So this model and is following on Miss Nikita's question. It's about how this will be sustained after, because this is based in data, but models need to be like more updated data need to be plugging in? Is somebody taking ownership of the model, or how will it stay, let's say, updated and relevant after the development?
Thank you, Marco. Yeah, actually, that's where machine learning takes the process. So, yeah, as I mentioned, I'm using different machine learning algorithms in my research. So what I'm doing, and as I told you already, I got a lot of confidentiality agreements and all of this stuff with international organizations. So what I'm planning to do is to create some kind of collaboration with them. So every time the model will be directly designed for this. So every time they publish a new survey, for example, for this country, and this survey is on this sector, or I'm organizing this data in quite a way that this can be possible. So this is going to be directly like linked with the model. So it's basically using plenty of big data and machine learning principles.
Hi.
But I still need to get the approval of a lot of international organizations. So that's a very difficult process. I got already some of them, but yeah, I mean, I need to do it for a certain amount of countries, not just for a couple, right?
Hi, Cristina. I'm Fernando.
Hello.
Hi. I'm really just following up Marcos and Nikita's question. I can see a really good application for what you're doing, especially for the bottom-up model. And my question is regarding the conflict between public information and private companies. Even though this is for developing countries, there's a lot of investment going into mini grids. Just the question is, when you talk to a private company, do you have like a special agreement with them to have the information first before publishing it, or this is because it's from ETH Zurich that is coming up the research and the funding? This has to be public information, just because of the conflict of interest.
Yeah, I understand. So actually what I'm doing with private companies, which is a completely different case with the international organizations such as the World Bank and the UN, for example, is that they are providing me this data and I'm using it just to validate my model and to calibrate it. So it's on my own use. I won't use this data for publishing anything afterwards. It's just for my own validation and calibration methods. And yeah, I mean, the data that I'm using as an input is basically data that you can find anywhere in the World Bank surveys, in the DHS surveys as well. And yeah, I mean, it's macroeconomic data that you can find anywhere because the model is going to be created in such a way that the inputs that you need, you can get them from wherever you want. But the model is going to link these top-down inputs with the bottom-up approaches that I'm developing right now. So that's because that's mainly in order to help these private and public companies to go there and get the data that they need inside. I mean, in the site that they want to electrify, because that's very costly and it just takes a lot of resources for them. So I'm just doing this work for them, and then they will be using these models with this data that I'm collecting through macroeconomic drivers that they can easily find.
That's great. Thanks. Okay.
Well, so just to end it here, I would just like to ask you a really small question. Do you have any paper or publications that you have which we can go through or that you plan to publish in the future on this issue?
Yes, actually, I'm working on one right now, and I have 3 already, so I can share them to you if you want. So it's about the case studies that I have in sub-Saharan Africa, which I presented in the University of Cambridge a couple of months ago. And another one was about the case study in Nigeria and Ethiopia. And the other one is the one for South Africa that I just presented you. So if you are interested in getting more insights about the modeling methodologies and all of this very heavy stuff, of course, I can share it.
Thank you very much. We will really like it if you share it with us, and if you do not mind, we will share it. We will try to share it with the whole Emanate community, along with also what we talked about a little time ago about the model of the United Nations, and we really want to show what went wrong with the models, even the models coming from such big sources or trustful sources. What can actually go wrong if things are not done correctly? So we would really like to do this. I imagine a post on our social network or even a newsletter about this subject with you. And
Sure, we can work on it.
And I would like to end it all. I would just like to thank you for being with us here today, and to have told us how a bad estimation of the energy demand and acquisition of cheap technologies in national electrification programs, for example, can bring terrible consequences, not only to the lives of people, but also to global statistics that are really important today to be able to attain this 7th Sustainable Development Goal. On behalf of the Emanate community, I thank you for the wonderful insights that you have given us today into energy demand modeling and how government policies as well as private or public investment should, or rather could, forecast results and performance of their future investment decisions and policies. If any of you who are joining us today here have any other questions, please feel free to carry on this discussion on our social networking platforms. For those of you who we could identify on Hangouts, we are going to send you a short survey soon, just as a feedback on the webinar that we have had today. And if none of you have any more questions, we would like to thank you for joining us today, and we would like to thank Cristina for having this presentation today.
You're welcome. It was a pleasure for me. So thank you for the invitation as well. And I really hope that we all can collaborate to Emanate, because it's a very interesting and very nice way to share our work.
Thank you, Cristina, and we hope the same.
Okay.
And so I wish every one of you a really nice day, afternoon, or night, depending on where you are. And please do not hesitate to carry the discussion on in our social networking group, or to contact Cristina directly if you may have any questions or if you're looking for any collaboration. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, guys. Thank you, Astu and Open, for organizing, and thank you, Cristina, so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye, guys.